Mr. Karshad Daruwala, who's the chairman of Sterling and Wilson Group. A man of many firsts, Karshad is credited with powering the company's emergence as India's leading mechanical, electrical, and public health engineering and renewable energy solutions provider as well. Karshad has been instrumental in introducing solar EPC way back in 2011, a segment that he believed had great growth potential. And this decision certainly changed the face of Sterling and Wilson and accelerated the company's growth as well. And to moderate this fire chat, I'd like to invite again Mr. Siddharth Zarabi, Managing Editor, Business Today TV, on stage, please.
Thank you very much. Very warm welcome again. And before we started, I just want to sort of say this. A Parsi and a Kashmiri with surnames that might confuse you, discussing renewable energy and the future of India. So, nothing more that tells you about what a great country we live in. And Khurshid, a warm welcome on this subject. Before I get into some technical questions, the very first that I have in mind, why did you pick this business to be in? I'm sure you would have succeeded in any other sector that you would have tried your hand at.
Yeah, so like some businesses, you tend to fluke. So I think, no, I think really in 2011, if you asked me at that time, 15 crores a megawatt, 15, 18 rupee tariffs, whether it would ever be here, I don't think we forecasted it in that way. We did feel that, yes, I think this is a future business. I think it's better to start early. But no strategy guy at that point of time would have ever felt that we'll be where we are today. So I think that just to put that as a fundamental. But when we saw this industry start moving and the speed at which solar's moved, we saw $2.5. That was the cost per watt, and then it came down all the way to about 20 cents. So it's a phenomenal transition, and I think that for me, I truly believe that the future is just starting. Means it's just so much brighter from where we are today. So.
Okay, I'll try and keep this conversation light, but ask you serious questions. Since all of you from the industry keep talking about this price thing, voice is free. Is power going to be free ever in India, even if it's renewable?
Close to free, hopefully 30 years down the line. No. But not.
But how will companies make money?
No, I think everybody is going to make money through the value chain.
Okay.
Today also, I think people right across, from manufacturing to everywhere, we do make money through the value chain. A lot of people have not understood risk. So I think that there's been a large learning curve on what risk to take, who takes it.
Pretty much all the entrants.
For everyone, right? So, but I think that learning has come through, tough lessons for IPPs, for EPCs, for lenders, etc.
Is the risk and the learning more for smaller companies, innovators, entrepreneurs like you, or is it equally or less for very large corporations which are also in this space now?
See, I think where the risk emanates in this business, at least on the global model, partly in India, if you see most of the projects worldwide, about 80 to 85% is funded by lending institutions, and it is non-recourse when you start the project. So typically, they don't want to take any risk at all. So they just want to pass it back down to the EPC. And when you had a time when tariffs fell, or let's say the cost of production fell 80, 90% over 10, 12 years, most people tended not to look at that risk. And then over the last 2 years, I think the module prices jumped up 50, 60%. So then there was a pause that who's going to take this risk? Now the EPC doesn't want to take it.
But the last 2 years is perhaps an aberration and things are sort of settling down?
Yeah, but 2 years of expensive aberrations which actually put a lot of pause in everybody's mind. So like right now in the global model, you're sitting with the bankers. The banker doesn't want to take it. IPP doesn't want to take it. EPC doesn't want to take it. Someone needs to. And things are getting stuck out there. So I think that risk allocation will happen. And at the end of the day, the tariff is just so low that if the tariffs go up a bit, I think the risk can get fairly allocated. So I think that's where the adjustments are happening in the global market right now.
You were listening in intently to the earlier panel where we tried to focus on the future trends. Add your thoughts on what was discussed. Did we miss out on any of the issues that will be part of hopefully a glorious renewable energy future in India?
See, I think one of the points that was spoken about on financing, I'll just put one perspective to you. The tariffs in Saudi Arabia today are in the range of about 80 paise to 1 rupee. In India, we are at about 2 rupees 30 paise to 2 rupees 60 paise. The capex in India is lower than Saudi. So even if I take into account a little incremental generation which Saudi has compared to India, the capex per unit generated is still lower in India. So basically the entire difference between this 1 rupee to 2 rupee 50 paise is coming on cost of financing. Now in South, means the international projects are able to get 25-year dollar loans at much lower rates of interest. In India is 15% at higher. So at what stage will we be able to be competitive on the financing side? And I know that we've got a 4% hedging cost, etc. So it may not come in that fashion. But I think that is going to determine the cost of solar, renewable power going up in the future.
But Khurshid, just for argument's sake, isn't that cost of financing an issue for all sectors? What is unique just about the renewable sector? Because all industry is exposed to forex fluctuations. Those industries which are highly import dependent more so versus others, and cost of financing is high relative. I think India is one of the highest cost capital economies of its size in the world.
Yeah, so there's a big difference on this sector, right? So coal has, there's a price for coal,
yes.
There's a price for gas, there's no price for solar, right? So the entire operating cost in this is going to be finance cost. So the effect of finance cost on the end output is dramatically higher in solar compared to anything else.
Are Indian lenders, have they done enough, or have they been slow on realizing and this opportunity and supporting companies to sort of do this, especially Indian companies to do this?
See, I think that actually the comparison won't be fair. If you're looking at Saudi, UAE, etc., and seeing the tariffs there, they've been pegged to the dollar forever. If you try and peg yourself to the dollar, you'll have other problems. So I'm not getting into the economics of that. But as soon as you don't peg yourself to the dollar and you've got a 4% cost of hedging, you are going to be expensive. Then that is the tariff that we've all got to live with. So I think we'll have to live with higher tariffs than the markets which are dollar denominated.
Okay. Let's talk about one of the things that came up earlier, and this is storage. And I spoke to you before this session also. Explain storage and what are the possibilities and where do we stand currently?
Yeah, so there was a discussion that came up, and I think both people had valid points. There was one view that came up saying that solar is the cheapest form of power, and the other one was that if you want it 24/7, it's not. And both are right. Okay. Now, I think that for me, the demand that if we are able to generate solar and feed into where is required, it surely will be the cheapest form of power. And there's such a huge potential in all those areas. And just to tap upon, I think all of us see the EV revolution. If the cost of solar generation is 2 rupee 50 paise, if the cost, as was mentioned, is about 1 rupee 20 paise odd for the grid, if you sell solar power to EVs at 4 rupees, because you should be able to monitor it through, instead of charging the normal tariff that
But how
you're
would
using.
you be able to do differential pricing?
Why not? Because you got
No, I'm
EV
just asking the technical
so you've
question.
got
I'm
EV
not questioning the concept.
Yeah.
Technically,
No,
explain.
you've got EV chargers, which are smart chargers.
Right.
They're able to capture nearly anything you want. So
Okay.
the amount of electricity flowing through a EV charger should be captured. If you charge at $4, then the entire argument just goes away of storage, right? Because like I'd gone to California, I went to Netflix's office. There were 350 cars plugged into chargers out there. You could charge them at 4 rupees right through. All the offices anyway pay fuel bills free, etc. They'll just give you the electricity free. The cost of, I think, oil imports, etc., going down. Now you can imagine the incentive to the consumer of EVs. And this whole storage concept then goes away of power at night at home because it is being consumed. And just one more industry that will actually hugely benefit. We're already seeing it on the marine side. So there's a company that I know of well, where they've been powering the ferries on the Scandinavian lakes. For the last 3 years, the ferry is just not put on an engine. It's only working on batteries, lithium-ion batteries. And now the companies are actually giving 20-foot containers. So as ships go inland, they'll just, as they come to offload containers, they'll just put on 2 or 3 20-foot containers for it to go to the next stop, pick those containers up, put 2 more. So the entire inland waterway, transportations, etc., can go green very quick. Again, without the expensive cost of battery storage, because now battery storage is propulsion. So I think that these are uses that will open up huge possibilities, but we will need these differential tariffs, we'll need these differential incentives to come in.
We have a, excuse me, a target of 450 gigawatt by 2030 from renewables, and we also have a net zero target by 2070, but that's a long distance off. 2030, 7 years more or less. Is that happening according to you?
Yeah, I think it'll happen. We heard all the challenges, and I think you can look at it in 2 ways, right?
Yep.
So irrespective of all the challenges that we've had till now, we are the 3rd largest every year in solar installations globally. And a lot of these challenges are being worked upon and should go away in the near future. I think if that were to happen, the potential would be huge. Also from a timing perspective, I think it's good for the country, because if we had built over the last 5 years at a much, much larger scale, the entire value chain would have got captured internationally, not within India. I think we've all read and we're seeing that there are huge plans for local manufacturing. The government is supporting it, the private sector is supporting it. So we may just, and if honestly it happens 2 years down the line, I think that should be fine for all of us, because then we should capture the entire value chain within the country rather than it go outside at a competitive rate.
This is a brilliant, excuse me, a brilliant point that's been made. And I'm glad you said this, because we sometimes don't realize as consumers, we want the best, we want it to be cheap, we want it to be 100% reliable. We don't care who manufactures it and what it does. And the way our economy has grown after reforms, for so many years, we haven't thought about self-reliance, Aatmanirbharta, when it comes to manufacturing. And I'm glad you picked on that point. Tell me, if we hadn't done that, what would have been the negative pitfalls? What Khurshid has just told us is that we are trying to do the entire value chain, or at least a significant part of it, within the country, and that has meant slower growth than what would have been possible if we had been completely import dependent. And there are countries and suppliers who would have been very happy with that scenario. Khurshid, expand on that point, please.
So see, as a solar EPC, I would have loved to see the market grow in India at a much faster pace. But like I said, that today, we were doing one plant, and I'll give you examples, 500 megawatts, 1000 megawatt solar EPC plants we were doing in Abu Dhabi. The largest capacity that the Indian manufacturer had, single manufacturer at that time, was 500 megawatts. 1000 megawatts. We just couldn't go to him only. Forget the price. Even if he was 10% lower than the international competitor, you couldn't just go and buy from him. He just didn't have the capacity to deliver. I think the Indian market needed protectionism for some time. I'm not a great fan of protectionism, but in an industry which is going to be an industry for the next 20, 30 years, where India is going to play a very large role. I think if you spend 4 or 5 years just creating an environment for the manufacturing sector to become globally competitive, I don't think it's a big sacrifice. And I don't mind the slow growth over the last 2, 3, 4 years. If in the next 2 years we can capture majority of the, or next 2, 3 years, we can capture majority of the value chain within the country, I think there's a huge opportunity for all of us.
What parts of the value chain do you think we stand a good chance on in terms of making it in India for India and also for exports eventually?
So I think if you see most of the plans declared, I think right now we must be between 15, 20 gigawatts of local manufacturing. And each guy must be, let's say, 1, 2 gigawatts max. Now, individual corporates are looking at 10 gigawatts and 20 gigawatts. First time people are thinking of competing with the Chinese. So I feel that in the next 3, 4 years, and they're going down the value chain. Now, what comes when and how it transpires, I think we'll see as it goes along. But first time there's hope that 3 years down the line, we will be in situations that you can buy from India, execute for India and for the world. That there was no chance of doing that earlier.
Okay. What policy changes do you think are still required, or not changes, maybe what are the policies that are required to ensure that all of this comes true?
I think as was mentioned by the panel, where we see a difference between the global situation and India, When you're starting a project internationally, you're only starting it after everything is completely ready. Means you're not hoping that, so and here you're starting the projects, the land still being acquired, the transmission you're hoping is in place, etc. So I think those areas, a lot more pre-planning needs to be done, and it needs to be just ready to build. For solar projects, once you're ready to build, then the risks are pretty low on technology. So I think I've seen a lot of data on creation of solar parks by the government, by various private parties. So I think creating the infrastructure to be able to build quickly, I think that's crucial going up in the future. And it will be a bottleneck. We've seen the transmission infrastructure. It will take time to build.
Okay, and that perhaps also ties in with the point that you made. Grow slower, but grow steadily in terms of have all the things in place properly. One more point that again came up earlier, and I want you to explain this to our audience. The rooftop solar possibilities. India is transitioning from urban to from rural to urban, and most parts of urban India are clusters, high rises. That's how accommodation is now being built. If you see what's happening, for example, even in smaller towns than just our metros. What's the potential for rooftop solar for our country?
So rooftop, if you see the policy that was done some time back, saying 100 gigawatts, 60 gigawatts utility, and 40 gigawatts on rooftop, right? So the utility is there. The rooftop is far beyond. Means I think we've reached about 10 gigawatt on the rooftop side. I think the net metering thing started a little slow, but now it's picked up dramatically countrywide. And we will see a lot more rooftop happening as we speak. If there's ever a push to slow down net metering and a person to generate and consume by storage, it'll just slow the whole thing down again. So I think that the cost of storing and using it for your home is just too unattractive at this point of time. Cost of storage will need to come down dramatically, and then I think that combination can
To
work.
what levels, cost of storage, what do you think will make it palatable?
I think the next panel coming will be able to say, but
Okay.
but let's say if I had to do solar in the day, it's about 2 rupee 50 paise. If I had to only do solar at night, it'll be maybe $8-9 of storage plus 2 rupee 50 paise of solar. So 11 odd. Then you take day and night, mix it in whatever time period mix you at, and then you'll come to the average tariff.
You touched upon and you gave us a very interesting perspective on the sort of the way we are trying to do it on our own and own and capture most parts of the supply chain. One of the fundamental things that will be, and this had come up in the earlier discussion also, is about a sustainable and uniform supply of raw materials. And while we find it easy to sometimes say, oh, there's so much solar in this country, there are a lot of problems when it comes to many of the raw materials. What can be done to secure ourselves? China has been doing this for decades now. It has long-term contracts all over the world. It has secured massive bulk supplies of pretty much everything that is needed. What can India do in this regard?
I think that's where the large corporates will have to play their part. I'm saying that if you're looking, you're right. If I look at China, I think in 2021, they were doing some 500,000 tons of polysilicon. Next year it was 1.1, next year it was 2.2 million. Now it's about 3-4 million they're talking about. So doubling capacity nearly every year in polysilicon, right? So they've gone ahead. But I'm saying that in our case, if we are going to be building, like I said, a few years down the line, at the scales that are being built globally today. So I think we did about 14 to 16 gigawatts. China did about 87 gigawatts. So there's no reason why we should not do the 40, 50 gigawatts a year. And if it starts 2 years down the line, I think everybody needs to just start seeing how to prepare towards that future.
One of the things that you said, and that stayed with me on a lighter note when he spoke about Saudi Arabia, the immediate interjection that I wanted to make was, why do they even need to consider that? Peak oil is not in sight, so why? And then he mentioned Abu Dhabi, and then he's given us more examples. Given what is happening, try and explain how people are doing it internationally to the Indian audience when it comes to solar power. You are a leading player there. Why are those countries investing, and how are they doing it differently than us? I'm sure they are doing it in some different way.
So like what Mr. Roy mentioned, that we are at maybe 12%, until we reach maybe 30, 40%, our grids can take solar power. And so we are still far away from that. All the other countries are even further behind than us. So I think all of us have got a good 5-10 year runway to keep building on that side. So I think that side push you will see all of us, because it is the cheapest source of power for the time it's being used, at the time it's being used. The entire green hydrogen situation, India is looking at becoming a green hydrogen export hub. So is Saudi Arabia, and so are countries which are fortunate to have the sun that we have. So if you take that requirement plus the normal power requirement that you'll have within the country, the solar build is going to be mind-boggling.
Okay.
And just I'll put a number.
Yeah.
I can't disclose who it is, but I know of a particular asset owner who's in Middle East based. Their plans are that they've got about $70 billion of assets today, mainly renewable. They believe by 2030, it'll be 300 billion assets. That is the size at which they are seeing the Middle East come up, not only for, and that you can't consume as power. Then you're talking about, instead of exporting oil, you will export green hydrogen, which then can be used in various uses that we've seen. And maybe the entire shipping industry can move towards green hydrogen and ammonia being powered for ships, rather than burning heavy fuel oil, all of that. So there's a lot of movement towards that.
Absolutely, and that's a space where several Indian companies have already, I would say, begun, and hopefully we'll see results there. As we wind down this conversation, just a couple of quick points. One is to do with the union budget recently, because we spoke about policy support. Was there anything that you would like to share with us where you felt that this sector has gotten some additional support?
I think majority of the support is come on the manufacturing side. And I think that's the sector that does require the support and the encouragement over the next, like I said, 5 years. So even in the previous budget, the current budget, and it seems to be that will be the focus going up in the future. I think beside that, the industry doesn't really need subsidies. We are able to now do it without subsidy. So, but just the manufacturing, encouragement, ecosystem, protected environment for some time, I think that's where the government should step in and help.
Okay, one final question, and this is to do with the supply chain issues that your sector and practically every other sector faced. COVID meant the breakdown of supply chains, and we saw policy responses driven by other factors. For example, semiconductors, which is not related to our conversation, but we've seen countries, including India, trying to say, listen, the global supply chain may not be the only way. We need self-sufficiency, or at least have some backstop in this regard. Do you feel that the renewable sector also faces certain challenges because of this reversal of globalization, if not a wholesale, but at least in pockets that we have seen?
Yes, so this is bound to, it's already happened. So if you see the three largest markets, so China, US, India, by far on the solar side at least, the largest markets. The US with the IRA, that Inflation Reduction Act, they've been making a huge thrust towards local manufacturing. And a lot is shifting there now. So I think that's happened. India, you can see the same. When we saw this entire dislocation globally, and let's say manufacturing plus one policy globally, it's a reality. I think you can see it across all industries, and especially for an industry like solar, where you can do it locally. It just makes sense for everyone. So most countries are moving towards trying to capture the entire value chain within the country, but then the country needs to have scale. Fortunately, US, us, China have the scale with our local populations, and then that can help you become a global export powerhouse on everything then.
For India, what would be a mix between self-sufficiency and necessary integration with global supply chains and imports thereof?
See, today on the solar side, at least the balance of plant, we believe we are the cheapest in the world when we build in India, even cheaper than what China does. So on the balance of plant side, then you're talking about importing the modules, where modules and cells today are being manufactured. The cell capacity is very low, that's going up high. And then there are plans for large groups to go right from silicon, sand to silicon, etc. So I think that give it some time, but I think that we will all get there, I think.
Absolutely. We'll all get there, and that's a good point to end this conversation on, because very clearly a lot of work is going on, but many of these things will come together. All the pieces of the puzzle will fall in place as we drive down the road towards a greener and better India. Khurshid, I enjoyed this conversation. Thank you very much for your time
Thanks
with us.
a lot.
With
Thank
that,
you.
it's a wrap on this conversation. Sakshi.